Hey guys, I'm Danny and this is Nurturing Noise. Today we're going to be talking about Pro Tools edit modes and when to use them. We're going to talk about what they are and what is the best case scenario for you to use each one of these edit modes. So let's get started. So the first mode that we're going to talk about today is called slip mode. This is the most common out of all the four. It's the one you're most likely going to be using on a regular basis. It's incredibly easy. It's the most user-friendly. All of our tools, such as the pencil tool, the grabber tool, the trim, and the selector tool, all of these things completely roam freely. And when I say that, I mean however you use them, they're going to follow you to exact detail. Now, by using slip mode, this means that you can layer clips on top of each other, which is super useful, especially if you're like, oh, I just need to move that over just a hair and it needs to blend easier. This type of editing mode will allow you to do that however you like. The tools that are most affected by the different edit modes in Pro Tools are gonna be the pencil tool, the trim, the selector, and the grabber tool. All of those act differently depending on what kind of edit mode you're in. So for slip mode, they all move freely and they aren't constrained to any grid, and you can just move them how you see fit. But I will show you some other edit modes where that is not the case. You'll end up finding that you're in slip mode the most, especially when working with music production, sometimes even matching up dialogue with a video, because you can also import video into Pro Tools if you needed to. But the clips can be layered on top of each other using these tools. So if you see how I'm dragging it over like this, say I wanted to layer right there, it then moved it freely to where I just dragged and dropped the clip. The second Pro Tools edit mode is going to be called grid. Now there are two different types of the grid mode. It's called relative grid and absolute grid. Grid mode works similarly to slip mode. The only difference is the tools that I mentioned prior, such as the pencil tool, the grabber, the trim, and the selector tool, they are all going to move on grid intervals that you set for your timeline. You can change the intervals, and I'll show you exactly how to do that, but if you were to click a clip and try to move it over and say it was at a bar, it's going to move it to the next bar in your timeline. So for the grid mode, there's two different types that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be relative grid and absolute grid mode, and I'll go into more detail in a second, but I just kind of wanted to show you how my clips are affected if I go into grid mode. So up in the corner right here, you're going to see grid right there. And right now it's in absolute grid mode. It'll pop up as blue for you. But if you did relative grid, it's going to turn like a violet kind of color. But I'm just going to do regular grid for right now. We'll just keep it simple. So basically what happens is if you move a clip on grid mode, it's going to move your clip to the designated interval in the timeline. And what that means is, if you can see on my screen, there's these lines right here that divvy up. These grid lines that are separating right here, they're actually every bar. So if you see up at the top, it's 65, that's measure 65. This is measure 66, measure 67. That's where the grid is locked to. So if I were to click and drag one of my clips, it's gonna only drag them to grid marks, which is super helpful if you're working in a loop, because a lot of the time you do need that exact spacing. But if you're trying to be creative or you're trying to layer it and you're like, that happened like a second too late or half a second, the grid is not going to be where you want to do that in. The grid works the best when you're dealing with samples and loops and everything like that. When you are doing it and when you do need to use grid, I'm going to show you a nice little thing that they came up with, which is going to be how to change your grid. This will allow you to, instead of maybe having the grid divide up every measure, say you need it, I don't know, half notes. Let's do half notes. So you're going to go up to the top and it's going to say grid and nudge, and it's just in this little box right here. Next to this grid right here, you're going to see a little box where it says grid value. If you hover over it, it'll pop up and say grid value. You're going to click it, and then it's going to show you all these options that you can choose from on how to divide up your timeline. And I'm gonna choose a half note, and you'll see how the grid lines change. Actually, I think I might want to zoom in for you guys a little bit so you can see that a little bit better. So I'm gonna go back to the 1 bar. So this is measure 65, this is measure 66. That's where the line is dividing right now. If I were to change it to every half note, now you see they've added another line right here. They have another grid mark. So if you want to click and drag it to every half of a measure, every half note, that is an option for you. And I think it goes all the way up until every 1/64th of a note, which if you're dealing with 64ths on the grid, like, I'm impressed. I haven't really used that very often. I think the biggest one I've used is 1/8 notes, but it's there for you as an option, which is super handy and helpful when you're working with that kind of stuff. Before we continue, if you guys are enjoying this content, please give me a like on this video. I'd really appreciate it. All right, so the third edit mode that we're going to be talking about today is called shuffle mode. Shuffle mode is one of the lesser used out of the 4 edit modes, but it's super beneficial whenever you're working with arrangement-based music or loop-based music. It makes it so much fun. It's a great creative tool. And basically what shuffle mode does, which makes it different from any other mode, is when you select a clip and you were to move it, it's gonna affect all of the other clips in your timeline. And it works really well if you're trying to be creative and you're seeing different kinds of mashups or different kind of placements certain clips could have or a sample could have in a track. But if you're working solely based on, trying to edit things together, shuffle mode isn't necessarily the most beneficial. So be aware that if you do make an edit to a clip, it's going to affect all of your clips in your timeline, in your track. So up in the left-hand corner, as we went to grid and slip mode, we're gonna hit shuffle and it'll be red. So now I'm gonna zoom out just so I can show you an example of this. So in shuffle mode, say I wanted to take this clip right here, and I wanted to see what it would look like over here. If I click and drag it, you can see it moved these 2 clips over and put this one here. Which, if you're not trying to do that and shuffle your clips, this is not the mode because it will affect the rest of your clips. It'll make room for it. So just keep that in mind if you are in shuffle mode, that if you take a clip to move it, it's going to move the rest of your clips out of the way. The last edit mode that we're gonna be talking about today is spot mode. You're probably gonna use this the least out of all 4, but I still feel like it's so important to go over when you might use it and what it does. So spot mode allows you to place your clips in an exact location in your timeline. This really comes into play if you're ever working in post-production sound or sound for film and you're editing dialogue or sound effects that need to be placed in an exact moment. So essentially it's so imperative to be able to use spot mode because you never know when you're gonna come into contact with a project like that where you might need to have a certain sound in an exact location, and instead of having to click and drag, through the nitty-gritty of your track, you can just use spot mode and it'll place it right there for you. And I'm going to show you exactly how to use this spot mode. Say there was a glass break and you needed to add in that sound effect. When you're in slip mode, it'll allow you to see exactly when that is on time code, and when you click and drag your clip over to your timeline, it'll pop up a window, and I'll show you what that looks like. So to me, where you would use it the most would be in post-production in any kind of sound for film instance. That's when I've used it the most. So I'm gonna go up here and change this. Right now it's bars and beats, but I'm going to change this, and there's a little arrow next to it right here, and you can do minutes and seconds, time code, feet and frames. I typically do time code. This is what time code looks like if you're not familiar with it. We've been at this edit little grid before, this edit mode spot, and we're gonna hit spot and it's gonna turn orange. So I need it right there at 2:43:02. So I'm just gonna click one of these clips, drop it, and this main screen is going to come up like this, and it's going to say spot dialog. And for right now, I'm not going to go into the other like sync point and duration. I'm just going to show you where to place your clips. But the start time we wanted at, let's say, 2:42:03, I believe is what it was. I could be wrong, but this is just an example. But I changed it right here to 2:42:03. And then we're gonna hit OK, and it's gonna drop that clip right into place for you, which is so incredibly helpful. Now, if you are working with sound effects or anything like that, I'm gonna go over the rest of the key tabs so I can explain it. So I clicked and dragged, the spot dialog comes up. I'm just gonna leave it there for the start, but you can set the end time as well. So if you needed it to kind of be extended, you could. So let's say we wanted it to go to 3:40, and 3:40 is fine. And then you hit OK. It's gonna extend that clip. So this one is longer. It'll help. It doesn't always work. Sometimes there is some more mixing that you have to do, but if it's like 1 or 2 frames, sometimes if you extend the end time to that, it'll work. And that's why it's so incredibly crucial. Spot mode is not as common for the everyday use, but if you are in post-production or sound editing, this is a huge edit mode that you will become more than familiar with. So that is all we have for today. I hope that this video helped clear some things up on the Pro Tools edit modes and when you would use them and how to use them, everything like that. If you guys would like further clarification or you have any questions on anything, please leave a comment below. I would love to answer that for you guys. If you'd like to see more videos about this kind of content, on how to operate Pro Tools, audio concepts, anything like that, I post videos weekly, so hit that subscribe button to make sure that you're getting the newest videos that I post. And other than that, that is all we have for today. So thank you for coming to Nurturing Noise. Until next time, keep nurturing your noise.